Ever get that feeling? You know that feeling where it seems like outward success, all that glitters, doesn't always mean someone's actually, like, found peace.
Yeah, yeah, it's like we see those picture perfect lives, those Instagram feeds, and can't help but wonder what's going on beneath the surface.
Right. And that's exactly what we're digging into today, this whole idea of can you reach the pinnacle of success and still feel kind of lost?
Empty, even.
Exactly. And for this deep dive, we're turning to the Chris Cacobia podcast.
Oh, I love that podcast.
You do. They did this fascinating deep dive on a fictional book, The Trials of the Heart. We're focusing on the chapters, get this, the peak of success and beneath the surface.
Ah, ironic, right?
Totally. But it gets at that contrast we're talking about. And what I found so interesting was how they use these three characters as examples.
Yeah, each one kind of embodies that struggle, right? Between chasing external validation and dealing with all that inner turmoil.
Totally. So we got Ethan Blackwood picture, a tech CEO, 35 years old, already built this empire with Novatech.
The classic overachiever.
Right. You'd think he'd be on top of the world, but...
But the podcast paints a very different picture. They talk about how Ethan is driven by this need to prove himself, probably stemming from those daddy issues they mentioned.
Yeah, they said something about his dad never really being around or something.
Right, so it's like he's constantly trying to fill this void with achievement after achievement, but it's never enough.
And it comes out in, like, some pretty intense ways. Remember that part where they talk about his temper?
Oh, yeah. Apparently legendary in the tech world. Even Lily, his business partner, can't always escape it.
And she seems like she can handle anything, but there's that part where she suggests he slow down, classic burnout territory, and he just...
This is it.
Completely.
Right.
The podcast said he saw it as a direct attack on his competence.
Which makes sense, right? If your whole identity is built around being the best, the fastest, the most successful.
Any criticism, even well-intentioned, can feel like a threat.
Absolutely. And that's what makes Ethan's story so tragic. He's so busy building these walls around himself, trying to protect this image.
That he pushes away anyone who actually tries to get close.
Exactly. And Lily, they mentioned, she sees right through it. She knows he's hurting, but he's so trapped in this cycle of achievement.
That he can't let anyone in, even if he wanted to.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like he's built this prison of success around himself, hasn't he? And he's trapped.
Totally. And he's the one who threw away the key.
Exactly. And speaking of prisons, what about those gilded cages we see all the time in Hollywood?
Oh, you know where this is going. You mean Julian Stiles.
Bingo. That's our next case study, the classic Hollywood heartthrob.
And his story is all about the allure and the danger of external validation, right?
Right. He's got the fame, the fortune, the adoring fans.
Yeah.
But is any of it real?
Well, that's what the podcast digs into. They suggest that beneath all the glitz and glam, Julian's terrified of real connection.
Yeah, they made him sound like he's always on, always playing a role. It's like he's forgotten who he really is.
Or maybe he's afraid to let anyone see the real him.
Because then he could be rejected, right?
Exactly. And they brought up this really telling scene between Julian and his co-star, Hannah. You know that one?
Well, yeah, where she's like totally into him on a real level, not just the Hollywood BS.
Yes. And he just shuts her down.
Ouch. Talk about self-sabotage.
Right. It's classic fear of intimacy. He's so used to surface-level interactions that anything deeper is just too risky.
So he pushes away a genuine connection just to maintain that perfectly curated persona. It's like, what's the point of all that success if you're miserable?
It's a good question, and it's something a lot of us grapple with, right? That fear of being vulnerable, of getting hurt. But by closing himself off, he's missing out on something real, something meaningful.
And that brings us to Liam Ryder. Talk about a controlling personality.
Oh, yeah. Liam's story was fascinating. The podcast described him as someone who could outplan a chess grandmaster, but when it came to relationships...
A total disaster.
Pretty much. Yeah. But what they pointed out, and this is key, is that his need for control stemmed from this deep-seated fear of abandonment.
Which, when they explained it, actually made a lot of sense, right?
Right. They talked about how he uses this idea of protection to justify his behavior, especially with his girlfriend, Emma.
Oh, I remember that part. It's like he equates control with love, which, as we all know, is a recipe for disaster.
Absolutely. And, of course, Emma ends up feeling suffocated, trapped in this relationship that's all about Liam's anxieties and not about genuine connection.
It's tragic because, at his core, he probably thinks he's doing the right thing. But it's all coming from this place of fear.
Exactly. And that's the thing about these stains beneath the surface. They might manifest in different ways: control, avoidance, anger.
Hmm.
But ultimately, they often stem from the same root: fear.
So we've got Ethan, Julian, Liam, all successful in their own ways, but all struggling with these hidden anxieties. Like, what's the takeaway here? Are we all doomed to repeat these patterns?
That's where the stains beneath the surface idea comes in, right? That's how the podcast framed it.
Yeah, those hidden insecurities and wounds we all carry around. It's like no matter how perfect things look on the outside, we all have those stains, don't we?
Exactly. And sometimes those stains, they're the things holding us back from real happiness. Think about Ethan's need to always be in control, or Julian pushing away anyone who gets too close.
Or Liam mistaking control for love. It's like they're all trying to build these perfect lives, but they're ignoring the foundation.
And a shaky foundation can only hold so much weight, right? So how do we even begin to address those deeper issues, those stains? Because it's easy to say work on yourself, but it's a lot harder to actually do it.
Right. It's like, where do you even start?
Well, the podcast suggested a few things, and honestly, they're pretty spot on. It starts with being brutally honest with yourself.
No more filters, no more curated Instagram feeds.
Exactly. Look at those stains, those insecurities, those fears, and figure out where they're coming from. Maybe it's therapy, maybe it's journaling, maybe it's having those tough conversations with people you trust. But you have to be willing to face those things head on.
It's about accepting that those imperfections, those so-called flaws, are part of what makes us human, right?
Exactly. The podcast made this really interesting point about how those stains, those vulnerabilities, can actually become sources of strength. Because when you're not so busy hiding who you really are, you're free to connect with others on a deeper level, to build more authentic relationships.
It's like, who are you when no one's watching, when the cameras are off, and the awards have been handed out? Are you comfortable with that person?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And that's what true success really comes down to. Not the money, the fame, the achievements, but that inner sense of peace and self-acceptance.
Because at the end of the day, we all have those stains. It's what we do with them, how we choose to address them, that makes all the difference.
Couldn't have said it better myself. It's about choosing to heal, to grow, and to become the most authentic versions of ourselves.
And on that note, it's time for us to wrap up this deep dive. Listeners, as you go about your week, we challenge you to think about your own stains, those things you might be trying to hide. What steps can you take, even small ones, to acknowledge them, understand them, and maybe even start to see them as opportunities for growth? That's all the time we have for today. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.